This, our fifth broadcast of the Where We Live series. We know that it was birthed out of just a regular conversation. And so we're excited that these series are making you talk amongst your friends, and it's creating these amazing opportunities to get to the bottom of things and really open up discussions right in our homes and where we live. My name is Ranita Robinson. I am the CEO of the YWCA Greater Green Bay, where our mission is a dedication to eliminating racism, empowering women, and promoting peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. And this is a fantastic conversation that we will be led by our partner with the Privilege Institute, Dr. Eddie Morrison. Dr. Eddie, would you take it away, please?
Yes. Hello, everybody. Welcome. We don't have a lot of time, so we're going to jump right in. I mean, really, today we're dealing with and focusing on the mascot issue, local, national, and perhaps with the wisdom of our panelists, we may even have some global implications here. I don't know. I'm in the learning mode myself, so I'm going to really turn to our panelists. I'm going to ask y'all each to introduce yourself just quickly, and then I'm going to turn to our first question. So, Lance, let me ask you first. Can you kick off? Just give us an introduction of who you are, and then we'll go to Mark, and then hopefully we'll get Jackie to join in, and we'll keep rolling. So Lance Kelly.
Thank you, Eddie. Welcome, Mark. I'd see your remote in, so Sagoli. So Lance Kelly, like my brief bio real quickly, basically raised in Oklahoma, member of the Muskogee Creek Nation, very proud member of that right now with the recent case, which we'll probably get into a little bit later. But I've been up here for 24 years, married an Oneida woman, and, just been here, teaching at the tribal school for a long time, and then I came over here about 14 years ago. So I've been at NWTC now, starting that, and I'm in my office first time in a couple weeks, so I'm just trying to prepare myself, but I appreciate the invite, and definitely have a lot of changes, a lot of things going on with the mascot issue. And, for Native people, this is not new. Mm-hmm. And, this has always been a discussion within our own communities for a long time. And there's Jacqueline, welcome. I'll let her, but, as we'll get into the discussion, we'll kind of talk about the historical, the present, many different levels of this discussion. So I'm just going to leave it at that and let my other two panelists go from here and introduce themselves. With that, welcome.
Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Nuenabaju and away Moganaduk, not away Benezi Indigenous cause, Numendo dem, Anishinaabe and Dow, Neopid and Donjaba. Mark Denning here, coming to you from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, home of the Democratic National Convention next week. And I just want to start by saying this one personal note from me to everyone that's here, and we'll be checking in later. Black Lives Matter. And it's just plain and simple. And being from Milwaukee and being in the hub of that, we've been having a spiritual unity fire, and Black Lives Matter has come and supported that in its different iterations. And when we talk around that fire with the leadership that are involved in social justice and giving marginalized people voices, this is at the top of mind for many people, not just Native people. And what it comes down to is race and representation. Mm-hmm. And by way of introduction, so everybody knows, and then I'll do the handoff. My first experience with this was the day I was born. I didn't consciously know about it, but certainly it was of interest to the government in who I was. It was of interest to the government that they label me. It was in interest of government that I have a number associated with my presence on this great earth. And that is where the labeling begins, and it does not stop. And the idea that we, all of us, have a chance to define ourselves is at the very center, if not the center, of this discussion. Because the mascots and logos and the racial representation of those is important for everyone, not just Native people. And again, just so folks will know, my background was at Marquette University. Mm-hmm. And my official introduction to that was, I was that guy. I was the second first warrior, a symbol that the university chose. They believed that Native people could represent themselves, and we could represent ourselves the way that we wanted at a university that called itself the Marquette Warriors. So I did that for 3 years, and it was an interesting journey. And I've learned a lot since, and I continue to speak out on this. And just recently coming off a bit of a battle with the local group here, Menominee Falls, and lots of implications there for the school board that made a discussion and a chance to change. So that is me, Mark Denning, coming to you from the Milwaukee area in Wisconsin. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. It's good to have you. I'm going to come back to you because I definitely want to get you to drop some more local knowledge, regional knowledge around what's happening in Milwaukee, Menominee Falls. Let's turn to Jackie. Jackie, I want to ask you, good to see you, by the way. Should I say Jackie or Jacqueline? I just want to make sure I'm doing it right.
Well, when I write, I'm a journalist and author. When I publish and stuff, I use Jacqueline, or my family says Jacqueline. But you know, my friends call me Jackie. That's what people call me in day-to-day life. So.
All right. Well, I'm happy to be in that category. It's good to see you again. I want to ask you to introduce.
Jackie, it looks like Dr. Moore is frozen, but he was just going to ask you to introduce yourself. So I want to say welcome. Thank you so much for saying yes. And I think we can go ahead and have you just introduce yourself, and he'll come back online.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, my name is Jacqueline Keeler, and I am a journalist and also I'm editor-in-chief of Pollination Magazine. And back in 2014, late 2013, I was part of a group called Eradicating Offensive Native Mascots. I still am. We're just a coalition of Native parents from around the country, and we trended and we created and trended the hashtag Not Your Mascot. So and that was in the 2014 Super Bowl. And I was sort of born into it too, like Mark. My parents were met through relocation. I'm Navajo and Yankton Sioux, and they met there through a program called Relocation, which was a federal program in the 50s, 60s, and early 70s to basically relocate young Native people from their reservations to urban centers and to terminate the tribes, to make them disappear.
Wow.
And this was the Termination Act was passed by Congress, and then this relocation program was to take young people, like basically to depopulate the reservations and then absorb the land and make Native people disappear forever. So my parents met there in Cleveland. Cleveland was a relocation site. There were a number of them across the country in different urban centers, and overnight they went from having no Native people practically after Tecumseh lost in Ohio, what became Ohio in his homeland there at Fallen Timbers, Native people were removed from Ohio, and then when my parents got there in the late 60s, it was the first time there had been a large number of Native people in Cleveland, and around 20,000 young people, and they immediately began organizing against Chief Wahoo. And so it's a natural response. And I also went to Dartmouth College, which had a Native mascot. And of course, once they started recruiting Native students in the early 70s, the first thing they did was organize to get rid of the Native mascot. And so I follow in their footsteps, and many other amazing people. Like I did speak to Mark a lot about his work as a his attempt to try to address the issue by trying to rehabilitate it as a mascot. But he showed me how that was just didn't work, And so I'm as a journalist, I write a lot about this issue. I recently at Pollination Magazine, I wrote a piece about what Not Your Mascot owes Black Lives Matter, because I frankly do not believe that I think we did a lot of stuff. We laid the groundwork, but in the end we failed. And it was really the Black Lives Matter, which actually, and the protests against the, the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, that really changed the landscape enough where victory was actually possible. Where some kind of, reckoning with our history, the taking down of Confederate statues of Columbus, of even here in Oregon where I live, of Thomas Jefferson, all of these things. It was only possible once, the playing field was really changed, and so really altered. And so, and then so that's also, I think Al Jazeera did a little video about me talking about that. So.
Wow, thank you. Thank you for that, Jackie. I'm sure appreciated. Mark, why don't we go back to your race and representation comment and the thing that you said that you would follow up with, and then we'll kind of just keep waiting and Dr. Moore will be back. But would you go ahead and follow up on that?
Sure. I think one of the things that happens with this subject of race and representation is sometimes there's this race to be the most woke in the room, that you have to have this groundswell of information to really get a handle on the subject. And it's really not true. All you got to do is be aware. Because believe me, when it comes to being woke, on a traffic stop, we're all woke. If you're brown and someone's stopping you, and what's the first question out of their mouth when someone comes to the window and they have a uniform? It is, show me your identification. And that is exactly what's happening in this country. Is for Native people in the mascot and logo issue, this race-based stuff is, what is your identification? At our birth, there's this thing called enrollment, and that is somehow supposed to define us. And unfortunately, it is a government system. It is approved by governments and supported by a lot of tribes in our country, meaning that as a Native person, who is Native and who is not? So that comes into a few categories. One is there's an official recognition that somehow there's a sanctioning of identity that comes from the United States government. And that sanctioning comes through a thing called enrollment. So each tribe, as a federally recognized tribe, has an enrollment sort of file. So there's a record of who is Native, who is not, and they actually keep blood quantum. And it's blood quantum, like, are you full of this tribe, or are you half, or are you a quarter, or are you less, or are you even descended?
Right.
That these kinds of questions kind of work into what is legally defined as a Native American. Then you also get this social recognition, which is a slippery slope where people in America can be whoever they want. So what we have kind of on the extreme of social identification with mascots, race-based mascots and logos, is folks, and I call it out, this show is not about kind of messing around the margins. It's a very direct program that comes out of the YWCA, and thank you for them. There are schools around Southeast Wisconsin, McWanago in particular, where people can socially identify as Native. What they'll do is they'll put on jackets that say Indians on them, and they will tell you right to your face or my face or anybody who will ask them, I am Indian and I'm Indian for life. And that is social identification. So one of the questions, of course, that we can ask as a Native person is, how is it that when your children are born into this world, what is it that they're greeted with? When we say goodbye to people we love in our funeral services, how is it that we say goodbye, and how is it that you do that? How is it that you name your children? All these different sorts of questions. And of course, all they can do is kind of point to their t-shirt and say, I am Indian. So then we get to the question of, what does it mean to be Native? Because what race-based mascots and logos do, kind of on the face of it, is you, me, we are defined by how someone else sees us. And again, back to that traffic stop. As a kid, I was told, when someone sees you in this town, you are Native. You are not Mark Denning. You are not Nottoway Benese. You are not any of that. You are a young guy, and you are to have your license in your hand, both hands on the steering wheel up on top or on the dashboard, and anybody in your car is quiet, not adding to anything, and you do not move quickly. So when it comes to race and identification, there's different iterations of that, but there are moments that when that definition of how outsiders define you is a dangerous moment. That traffic stop, that physical dangerous moment, there are also slow ones that can be better talked to by my colleagues that are on this training, on this video. They can talk very well to the psychological damage that can be done over long term, not just to the individual who is Native, but to the people in the communities all around them. So I want to keep this short because you have very educated and veteran voices on this, and I have great love and respect for all of the work that they do. To me, I'm a kind of an accidental tourist on this journey. I just happened to go to a university that was named Warriors. I just happened to be the only guy of 13 students that raised my hand when a university asked, who amongst you as Native people will change the narrative of how you're perceived in the NCAA? We will be the first university to have Native people represent themselves. You can be the place of that change. We can be the place of that change. I bought into that, and I was wrong. It's because I wasn't a thinking person back when I was 19 years old. I was more kind of living life, moving through it as best I could and trying to survive college at 19, 20, and 21. I had a lot of help. I wasn't alone, but I bought into a narrative that somehow we could be Native in an arena where people had no idea who we were for real.
So I see Eddie's back, but just, and I don't want to repeat what both my colleagues, Jackie and Mark, have said, and there's a lot of information there. I just want to, maybe give a little more over a little more broader perspective. I mean, all these issues that we're talking about, I mean, these are mascots. Is another issue that we have faced as Native people. Growing up in Oklahoma, my parents met at college, Bacone, which is in Oklahoma. Then we moved. I was an urban Indian. I mean, all these stuff that we're kind of alluding to, it all comes into this discussion of the mascot. I was going through my papers here, and I saw one of my mentors, Suzanne Harjo. I think Jackie probably knows her very well. Just going back to my OU days when I was 19, 20, 21, learning about this too, being called chief, on the basketball court, and so forth and so forth. So we have all these stories that we all share, we all have learned. So when you talk to, and I see someone has a question here about, what can I do? But having these discussions is definitely a starting point. I'm in the classroom, I'm talking about these issues from many different levels. And I just want, most of them are non-Native students who have no or basic level understanding of this. And I always share, Wisconsin is definitely a hot point. Bar Munson is a key component of that in our state of Wisconsin, doing this for 30 plus years. And her information's out there, race-based mascots, and really focuses on the K-12 education. So if you really are interested in that, that's the starting point within your communities. And it's like I said earlier, this is not new for us. Now it's on the national spotlight now, but for us, here in our communities, it's been a discussion for a long time. So I'm just gonna leave it at that. So I see Eddie's back now.
Yeah, it's good to be back. I appreciate y'all having some patience with the cut wire by my electrical company, but I'm back. Listen, I wanted to ask y'all to talk about this question of, local. If someone has a mascot in their school, in their kids' school, in their community, I think there's been a lot of attention given to the Washington football team, and I don't want to lose sight of how big that is. But what's your advice to a parent or a community member, and maybe someone who's not Native, who wants to be in support, who wants to be an ally? What would be your advice to them to really challenge their school or their organization or their city, municipality, or possibly their university to really reconsider this mascot, this name, this statue, whatever it may be? what's your advice to the local community member? Let's start with you, Lance, and then we'll work our way back to Mark and let Jackie end that one. Lance, what's your advice locally?
Well, just like I said earlier, in Wisconsin, there was a state law which basically said, you could approach your school board. And I think that's that starting point for some people, going to your school board, talking to your local elected offices. So that has happened. That has occurred. Kewanee 10 years ago did it. National News, USA Today paper. You had a former teacher who basically approached the community and then took it to the State Department of Education. So, that's one way, but also just talking to, informed parents who are concerned about, certain issues, certain mascots, certain race-based images. And that's where I come from a lot of times in my classroom and talking to people is the imaging that is promoted out there. What are little children going to see and what are they going to remember? So that, that's where I'm coming from. The education, that level of learning is always there for individuals. And we all do it, even within Native communities. I mean, I know Jackie's probably going to talk about some of the stuff she's written about, the research that the Washington football team did, the Washington Post. But, you're not going, all Native people are not going to agree on this issue. But really trying to learn themselves. I always struggle when I see at powwows, you have, Native people wearing, Chief Wahoo's hat and, and the Redskins hat. I was like, why? So that's always a struggle within our communities too. Learning, we have to learn ourselves. So maybe that's just a starting point. So I'm going to let one of the other panelists keep on going.
For me, and I think Lance is going to be in total agreement on this. We're both glad Jacqueline's last on this question because that's going to be the best answer. So hang on, it's like women lead, right? But we got to set that up first. And for me, that setup is, one is self-education. You have to begin with yourself. Why is this issue speaking to you? And why is it important to you? In discovering that personal journey, you will find how to have it make sense to others. For some with a significant Native population, that population, it may make a lot of sense. They'll say, you know what, we've been looking at educational research. We have a public school that needs to be teaching all children, not just some. So we learn about that. You learn about yourself first. And by challenging yourself to learn first, I'm not just including Native Americans, First Nations people, the tribal group that is specific to your area. All of those are things you should be learning in this discussion. But when I say learn about yourself, I'm saying look at you. Deep in you and deep in your ancestry is a story that you share with us. For those who are of German descent, you will not have to travel far. Where German immigrants in New York were made as cartoon characters with heavy brows and ape-like features. Irish people as immigrants swinging in New York from building to building. Areas of Chinese population on the West Coast and other places that are targeted. If that person is Chinese, they get it. They understand what it is to be generalized like that. And certainly looking at your background, talking to your elders and knowing what they've experienced when it's come to their identity, that is where you can start, because then you can begin to say, this has made me as a person and who I am as I sit here today. It's not just about us as Native people. It's about you as you sit there if you're a non-Native person. The second thing I would say, and I'm just going to keep it to two very short things, and that's to have some kind of listening sessions to gather people together, allies, folks that may be of similar thought, to put a note on the store window of a neighborhood-owned store and have an affinity discussion, a discussion where people, like-minded folks or other folks who may even disagree, can come together and sit around a dinner table. Not now, of course, but we can get together outside of parks and social distance. We can talk about ideas that are of challenge to us. Befriend people that maybe aren't on your political spectrum every once in a while on social media and kind of give a beat to them and their thought. But gather people together of similar thought, of similar wanting to do something. because what you're seeing and what you're sensing in your community isn't right. And you are exactly right when you have that sense. And the last thing I'm going to end with is this, on my 3 pieces, which I'm sure are terribly short, because those 3 starting points are going to be different for everybody. And that starting point is begin to understand the folks on the other side of the aisle. Those people who say, this is a sacred kind of presence for me, an attack on this is an attack on my childhood, that what you're wanting to do is diminishing my life, because this was good enough for me, for us to be called Indians, even though we may not be, but this was good enough for me. And now folks from outside or inside the community are telling me it's not good enough for me. Why is that? Can you speak with them instead of this appearing at public forums, speaking into a mic and looking at a school board that is doing their best to not look or say anything and just be kind of interested and not show exactly how they feel while testimony is happening? That is one of the worst places to have genuine human communication, is where the lines are drawn and people are talking past each other at a microphone at a hearing. So those are my 3 pieces, and I'll turn this over to Jacqueline, please.
Yeah, I guess the first thing I would say is prepare for the long haul. I mean, and also, so I had done a podcast called Not Your Disappearing Indian, and you can find on iTunes and stuff like that. And I did one where I interviewed a lot of Native mothers and women who have led this fight in their own school districts. And it's an ongoing fight. Like, their kids are grown up now. It's been, I think they started back in the 80s or something. I mean, it's prepare for the long haul. I think the dynamics, as I mentioned before, have shifted because the Black Lives Matter has altered the playing field, made this more unacceptable, and made victory easier, quite frankly. And so the other thing I would say to do is to go to Twitter and look at all the Not Your Mascot hashtags. It's, you're looking at I was one of the parents who helped launch that hashtag over the Super Bowl 2014, and we trended it nationally, which at the time was very unusual for a Native hashtag to do. And so, but look at them, because there's a lot of arguments in there. And like Mark was saying, they actually have, you can study we addressed the trolls, the Redskins fans, and we were able to, I have to say, as a Native woman, a lot of people won't say this stuff to my face. Like, if I'm in a room and there's a bunch of white people talking, they're not going to say these things around me. So I'm actually unaware of a lot of what they think or how they, but on Twitter, that you can suddenly find out. And so we were able, in very short ways, to develop 140 character responses to these different things. So I would suggest look at Not Your Mascot, go through 6 years of tweets, and you will find everything that has been said has been done already. You can learn from what we've already done. And actually, EONM, Eradicating Offensive Native Mascotry, we are looking at doing a historical series, interviewing folks like Mark, who have been part of the struggle and have really interesting stories and things to teach us over a 50-year period, right? And so I think that would be a place to start. The other thing is the different arguments. I mean, those are, yeah, I think you will, I don't know, it's weird. I'm not sure. So honestly, I feel like I call it mascotry. I came up with the word, I invented the word mascotry, and it's sort of a take on minstrelsy, right? Where there's a performance aspect to the red face, like with blackface. And it's a way of reinforcing whiteness, right? Reinforcing their privilege by being able to do this. And studies recently done actually by Dr. Stephanie Freiberg, funded by the Kellogg Foundation, they did focus groups, and they found that actually that white people, when they see other white people dressed in red face, it makes them feel really good about themselves. It increases their self-esteem. Yet studies also done by Freiberg found that Native youth, when they were exposed to a Native mascot, had reduced self-esteem right afterwards, and also were less able to envision their future. Like suddenly they were part of society in which they realized they had no part. And she actually found that Native students who said they were okay with Native mascots before being exposed actually had an even steeper decline in self-esteem, which points to sort of a coping. We use a lot of energy in a white supremacist society to try to make what's happening around us okay, or to deal with it, and energy we could be using in other places, and certainly students could be. And I should point out that most Native students don't go to a high school which is majority Native, right? Most of them go to a high school where they're the only Native student. That's the norm. So imagine being that student and that family and having to educate everyone else. It's like trying to hold back the ocean, an ocean of ignorance promoted by stereotypes taught by mascots. And studies also found, a review of research actually done by the University of Buffalo in 2015 found that Native mascots not only promote negative or stereotypes about Native people, they promote negative stereotypes primarily, and also they then encourage negative stereotypes about other ethnic and racial groups and minority groups. And so it has an effect, and it has no place in a pluralistic society. It's not part of the building blocks in which we can create our beloved country, right? And so I think the other aspect is, I would say that I'm not sure that white men understand what it means to be mascoted, because mascotry is not the only way they are known, right? This is the case for Native men, right? I meet people all the time who say, you're the first Native person I've ever met, right? It's pretty shocking, right? And so I tell them, when people were coming at us on Twitter with, what about the Vikings? These whataboutisms. And I would say, well, it would be the same if Vikings was the only way you ever saw a white man, ever, right? You never saw a white man, on television anchoring the evening news. You never saw a white family being in a TV sitcom. You never saw a white man saving the world in a Hollywood movie. You walk into a bookstore with thousands of books, and maybe one of them features a white man as a protagonist, right? One. And this is the world we actually live in, right? So the only way we're seen is through mascots. And they estimate there are about 2,000 high schools that have Native mascots, right? Mm. And we are like about 1.5% of the population, right? If you were to extrapolate that to the Black community, and you guys are about, what, 15%? I mean, quite a bit, more of the pop 10. I mean, you're talking about 20 to 30,000 high schools that would have a Black mascot. Mm. And imagine the stereotypes and how much energy it would take from the energy to fight that, to try to stop it. And so, yeah, I do really credit, I had mentioned this earlier, that I do credit Black Lives Matter for finally giving us these victories, because we did all the groundwork, but we, in the end, failed. We weren't able to get these changes through. And it was because of white supremacy, because they were unwilling to listen. And I often call white privilege and white supremacy the white privilege, the house that white supremacy built, right? Mm. So they live in this house built by white supremacy. They don't know it's not the whole world. They walk through the rooms, they look at the view through the window that's framed by the window. This is what they think, this is all there is. And the rest of us are outside of the house. And we're like, you're in a house, we can see it. And so this is the real difficulty. I think that, I think it takes a lot of effort. And this is, of course, the work of the White Privilege Conference and folks like that, to try to create that dialogue and that understanding. And it's a really difficult job. I mean, so yeah, I think we raised the profile of the issue, and folks like Susan Harjo, conducted. Well, I met her when I was at Dartmouth. She came as a Montgomery Fellow, and she helped us actually fight. They're trying to bring back some really horrible Native ceremony for seniors, graduating seniors, where you break a pipe, you break a sacred Native pipe as a promise that you'll come back to Dartmouth and support it for the rest of your life and stuff. And we had to put a stop to that. We're like, no, and it was crazy, because going to Dartmouth was the first time I realized that this mascot issue was different, in the sense that, you couldn't tell people, other students, like, hey, this is not okay, because they just could not understand what you were talking about. And I spoke to the senior council, and I had Susan Harjo with me, and we were like, I was trying to explain to them, hey, it's like breaking a menorah, like breaking, a crucifix, that kind of thing. The chalupa, the pipe, is sacred to my father's people. it was brought to us by the White Buffalo Catwoman. And they were just like, and literally, they were just, and my friend Maria, she was from South Central LA, and she was on the senior council. She came to me afterwards, and she had like tears streaming down her face, and she's like, Jackie, you're saying these things, but they don't understand you. And I'm like, yeah, it's really weird. It's like this weird, thing. And so it's a really, and actually that study that was done by the Kellogg Foundation, it actually also found that they did a kind of to see how human white people thought we were. And they were doing focus groups of adults, white, and then college age whites, two separate focus groups. And they found that both focus groups found Native Americans to be 60% human. That is not fully human. 40% animal, right? And then and they also found that they asked people, how much sympathy how much do you understand or appreciate or have, agree with the mascot issue? And it was around 30%. And then when they asked them about Standing Rock, it was more closer to 80%. So an issue like Standing Rock, where you're talking about treaties and laws and rights, people understand that, white people do. They don't understand the mascot issue. And that speaks to the stereotypes and the privilege, the white privilege that is encoded in the practice of mascotry.
Yeah. Jackie, I wanted to ask you just 3 quick questions, and then I want to turn to Mark and Lance to ask them about, since you mentioned sovereignty, some of the things that are happening locally in Green Bay. But being at this so long, first I want to ask you, as an activist, when I saw you at White Privilege, I never thought we'd be sharing the news of the Washington football team. So I'm wondering, how did you feel? Like, is there a point as an activist committed to this over your life and doing this work that you take time to celebrate this victory? What did it feel like to hear that announcement?
Well, when I spoke at the White Privilege Conference, I was speaking about Standing Rock and about sovereignty, right? I think the title was that America is still a colony, right? And in this case, this issue, I began working on this in 2013 as a Native parent, right? As a parent of Native children. And of course, I had known that my parents had been active as young people in the Cleveland mascot issue, but it was sort of before my time, and I would hear them kind of grump about it when they were watching, baseball on TV or something. And I was like, I grew up in a place where the local high school had a atomic mushroom cloud as their mascot, and that was like the horrible mascot in my world at that time. And so, but it was going to Dartmouth that really opened my eyes to it. Like Mark, it was the college experience of mascotry. But I think that I felt good, but I knew that we hadn't won. We hadn't won on the facts. We hadn't been able to convince them. Do you know what I mean? What had happened was that Black Lives Matter had made the situation untenable. Do you know what I mean? And that's how, and so I remain guarded about white supremacy and how it impacts our lives. I remain cautious. I remain observant. Do you know what I mean? It's, my children are Native. My husband is Mohawk and Seneca, and my son definitely can't pass for white. Do you know what I mean? And I worry for him. Do you know what I mean? My father was basically jumped and driven out of his hometown by white men, and then given a choice to either go to prison or go to the army, and he had to give up his college scholarship to fulfill those white men's dictates, right? And my grandfather, my grandpa Keeler, he was 3/4 Dakota. He was beaten to death by the police, and in the city of Yankton, which is named after our tribe and used to be part of our reservation. And we didn't know this until 2015, when my cousin went on Ancestry.com and did a search of my grandmother, and we were told that he drowned in the Missouri River. And then we found that they were news article saying that she had asked for an autopsy, and then they described the way that he died, and the trauma of that was with my father. I think most of my life until my mom's Navajo family, or the traditional Navajos, they did a ceremony for him, and so it's just that kind of pain, that kind of trauma. It leaves you wary. You're not. It's a system you don't trust. You don't trust your loved ones in it. You don't trust your future in it. You don't think that it's always going to get, I don't know. I think it's the fight. I'm still watching it, and I want to see where it goes. And if after the, with this whole pandemic and how we're spending more time thinking and talking and envisioning, what will come out of it. But I think that, like I had said in the America is Still a Colony speech, that I think in the end, the question is, if you are, if this is a colony, and I wouldn't say Black Americans are colonists because of our history, but I would say that, if you are a colonist and you are a good person and you are a moral person, then what would ethical colonialism look like? And it sounds like a nonsense question, like, oh, come on, but the main thing is that we need to change where they sit at the table. We need to change their view out of the window. We need to alter the house that they live in, and we need to really. And this is where it is about changing the playing field. A lot of it, one of the things I learned from the fighting the mascot issue at Dartmouth was I learned that I could never allow them to dictate the playing field for me, because once you do that, then you've lost, because the playing field they choose, you're meant to lose on. So that's sort of an answer.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jackie. Mark, I was going to ask you about this Washington decision, mainly as it relates to our home team, since we're talking about where we live. Should we anticipate any pushback within Green Bay, any support for the old mascot? Any people showing up with old mindsets? If that is the case, should the Green Bay Packers consider some kind of not only does everybody have to wear a mask, but you can't wear a mascot, so to speak, into the stadium? Should there be any preparation that we anticipate locally to be able to show support for this monumental change?
Well, I look forward to what happens when you put it together. But you're onto a response. I'm going to keep mine short because I'm really looking forward to hearing from Lance. One is to understand just how deeply ingrained this is. I mean, one is what we've had 528 years of having a misnomer. When Columbus landed during the Columbus Exchange, he didn't call us by the names we called ourselves. He called us Indians. And even when the historical mistake was made, it was still maintained. Made and maintained, and that is exactly what's been going on for all of those years. So when someone rises up, like Jackie, like Lance, to go against this, understand what we are against. Hundreds of years of inculcation, brainwashing, essentially, at the hands of teachers who are unknowingly, unwittingly a part of this lie. And the other part of that I would also say is there is this thing called branding. And you're right on in beginning to touch it. Branding is such a powerful machine, especially in a democracy where kind of the most popular thing wins and where people are looking to be and find the most popular thing. I mean, that's just a part of our capitalist society, right? To find that sweet spot, to get on the minds of a majority of people. And that's exactly what happens to race-based mascots and logos. They turn the question into, well, let's have a vote on this and see what's most popular. Just as Jackie's point is, that is defining the playing field. If Native Americans are 1.5% to 2% of the United States population, what are the chances of us being a majority of anything? So in a democracy, our voices are effectively squelched. When it comes to looking at the Green Bay Packers and producing a public demonstration, perhaps that day will come when they play the Washington team, and there'll be expressions of gratitude. I'm not so sure about the Washington team doing the right thing, because do we congratulate our children for doing what they're supposed to do? Or do we congratulate people for going outside of themselves and doing the things they should be doing beyond what's expected?
Yeah, that's a great
Washington
point.
has done nothing beyond what should be expected and be human and move in a powerful way through this world. So it may be that the sponsors need to be commended because they went against what may be their dominating popular numbers to say we cannot do this anymore. So I'm just kind of end with this point is with COVID-19. There are important lessons that are being left out when people do mascotry around Native people. And one of the messages that comes clearly from dominant culture is the expense of the aged and the fragile. That in a pandemic, there are lives that can be spent, and that'll be just fine. And that is older people. When people look at the numbers of Native Americans across the country that have been affected by COVID-19, they're going to see in marginalized communities, our numbers are far lower. Why? Culturally, we value our elders, we protect the vulnerable, and we have central lessons of the sanctity of life. We just don't talk about it. We just don't use it as a political line. We do it. We do have tribal challenges that when COVID-19 will come into our communities, and eventually it will, we're going to have to work with tribalism to try and defeat it. But we will have more than frontline people. And I'm just going to give a shout out to all the Native people there. And I'm trying not to cry, you guys, because it is tough to live in a world where you're surrounded by people saying that they're elderly and they're fragile, are expendable.
Yeah, Mark.
Eddie, before you ask maybe that last question real quickly, I just want to, what kind of going off what Mark and Jackie, and especially Jackie and I, when I asked her to be part of this last week, well, one of the first things we mentioned was some of the work that people are doing, to change that name for the Washington football team. And right here in Oneida, I mean, we definitely had one of the main ones. Her name was Susan White, and she passed away a couple of years ago. And personal friends with her, my wife was, but she really got into the economic aspect of that, and that's where some of this change came from initially. This talking to Nike, talking to FedEx, some of these major corporations, and Eddie, you and I have talked about. I mean, I'm so surprised, but I'm not there yet. I mean, I don't know, and Daniel Snyder, I mean, he is the kingpin of this. He wouldn't have done this unless it was about money, and then on the other side, you got the sexual harassment stuff coming out now. I mean, is that kind of like hiding all this stuff? Like, there are so many things to this, but I just want to acknowledge, her work, and other people, Susan Harjo, and, we have another one, Norbert Hill here. I mean, he is Oneida, a longtime educator, and she went to Dartmouth. I know she knows Mattel and those people that really were part of that initial lawsuit. So we can go back. I mean, all these people, we're just a small part of this. I'm just trying to do my own thing. She's out on the front lines. I mean, she is writing, protesting, you name it, it's happening. So I really just want to, say that. But I don't know what else we got, Eddie, so I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you, Lance, a little bit about, Oneida, Green Bay, Packers. What is the economic impact? What power does the Packers play or have? And what relationships do the Packers and Oneida have together? And what can we expect? What can we be preparing for? And also, there's been some local legislation happen here with Oneida and Green Bay. And just wondering if you can just give us an update, a sense of that as well.
Well, I think we have 11 minutes, so it's going to be short here. But, definitely several lawsuits has been going on here in Oneida with the Village of Hobart. And the most recent one was definitely probably one of the high points was the appeals court basically threw back court that was filed, a case that was filed by Hobart over the Oneida's Big Apple Fest, which is always held in the fall. Over jurisdiction, sovereignty, all this stuff comes into play. And once again, this is a bigger picture than just a few minutes here. But that plays a big part. Oneida, I've been here 24 years. I'm part of this community now. Taught a lot of our younger generations who are now in their 30s. The chairman right now, one of my former students. So I have a lot of that connection. But definitely been talked about, they're very excited about this case, you know, with Village of Hobart. I've done PowerPoints, speaker series throughout on our campus and outside of this campus. So I've done that research, and Doug Keels, another one, he's at Northwestern, he's doing a lot of stuff. So there's other people doing this, but it's a struggle. And, you know, I think I referenced my tribal affiliation with Muskogee Creek, which came out of a case in early July, once again about jurisdiction. And basically now Oklahoma, the Creek Nation can say that the reservation never disappeared, which we always knew, but we were taught too, hey, there's no reservations in Oklahoma. But, you know, now that case basically has stated that, and I've been told this by my lawyer friends in the last week or two, this is the biggest case in our generation, the McGirt case. So when you hear that term, that case, that is definitely a one that we'll be studying and just leaning on so much. So getting back to the Packers, you know, Oneida Packers have a relationship, economic, political, social. You got former Oneida players who play for the Packers. You know, all this stuff is past and present. So I just like to, you know, say that in a very quick manner. Feel free to email me if you have more questions. I know some of my colleagues are listening too. I've done this on our campus several times. So, but that's just a long story in a very short manner.
Yeah. Well, we're going to have to get you all back to do a part 2 in our follow-up series. But let's get y'all to do a closing statement. Anything on your mind, anything you want to add? If you got 2 minutes to do a closing statement as I get ready to pass it to Ranita to close it out. So Lance, let's start with you. Give us a 2-minute closing statement. We'll go to Mark, and then we'll go to Jacqueline, and then we'll pass it to Ranita to close us out. Lance, what's on your mind closing out?
There's a lot, but I'll end with this. And I think Jackie referenced this with her children, and I'm very proud too. You know, and Eddie, you know this. So my daughter did this 6-7 years ago, and she was in 6th grade, and hopefully you can see that. And she was going to one of the few Oneida students that attended a public school, and she really questioned why teams use mascots. And I did not really, her mother and I, yes, she's been trained in this area, but we did not mention this. And she brought this up herself, and just a little, you know, the typical who, why, and all that stuff. So she's been trying to figure that out herself, along with all of us. And now as a young Native, strong Native young lady, she is still doing this. So I'm just very proud of that.
Thank you. Thank you. Brother Mark, why don't you give us a couple minutes of what's on your mind to close out?
One is to thank the YWCA for putting this on. This is very appropriate for my last comments. I'm going to give a shout out support to the Malia Chow family. During the name change that successfully was done at Menominee Falls High School, it came out that as we were producing study after study that showed that Native American children were made to feel unwelcome, lower self-esteem in the halls of the high school. A lot of times those children will move out of the high school to find self-esteem, to find value, to find their place in the world, because the high school isn't a welcome place for them that carries these names. That Indigenous woman encountered a human trafficker, disappeared from her family, and was eventually found dead. So that is a very powerful story. And it is not an only story where Indigenous people are not made welcome to feel at home in the halls of a public school. Myself, I hope that one day people will move away from this topic and say, this needs to be a popular vote. This needs to be a referendum. This needs to go to children, and that folks will decide that the truth does matter in our society, and the truth will guide us, and that truth will free us from the very things that chain us to how other people think of us and define us. Thanks to the YWCA, and that story was for you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Brother Mark. Jackie, let's go to you and get a couple minutes of what's on your mind as part of your closing statement.
Yeah, I think issues like mascotry or pretendianism or red face are deeply tied to the colonial structure of the society we live in, and they're an expression of it. So I think that the real solution actually lies in changing that relationship. Finding ethical, and like I don't actually think ethical colonialism is possible, I should say, but even contemplating the matter in that framework presents different opportunities. And I think that for Native people, the way in which our identity is made fuzzy around the borders is directly tied to our claims to land that threaten the claims of the United States government. And so there is a political aspect to it, and our treaties and everything, these are all threats to the integrity of the colonial project, right? And what it's doing to our lands, to our people, to our identity, all of it being mined and profited and commodified, right? So it's all of a piece. And I think that if we were to do a vote, the outcome would not change until we change the structure of the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Indeed. Mark was not as successful as you were, not crying. And I just want to first say thank you all. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your heart and for bringing to the fore just the painful reality of the history and the things that we have to be vigilant about so that they change and they're different for the little people that look up to us and want to have a better and different future than the one we exist in right now. I just wanted to highlight the reality of how connected we all are. And so thank you for talking about Black Lives Matter, providing some leverage rather than being a point of separation or a point of acrimony, that these two people groups that have had the kind of history that we've had were able to come together and have an understanding that we are stronger when we're unified. I'm grateful for the stories that you all have shared. I mean, and those are just a widow's mite in terms of the broad history of the things that are keeping us up at night, in terms of just the humanity not being honored, and in terms of people not valuing just who we are as individuals and the worth of our humanity. And so thank you for your service. Thank you for your service. And just thank you for just being in this, which is one of many more times for us to come together, perhaps even have longer times, perhaps having more formal times where we're together, where we celebrate that we're still here, right? Because at some point we have to recognize we're still here, and we might walk with a limp, but we are still here. And as long as we have breath in our bodies, we can do something that is actually going to support the people that are coming behind us. You provoked a lot of emotion, but you provoked a lot of reminding energy to remind me that, you know what, I do have breath in my body. I do have power in my position. I do have an opportunity to behave differently than I have behaved when I sat on the sidelines. And so thank you. Thank you very much. We will certainly be in touch with you. We hope that our listeners do something. There are a lot of conversations that are happening right now. They gave you some very specific tools and some things that you can do. And I want to remind people that though you don't see a change right now, doesn't mean that what you're doing isn't having an impact. So do something, and we hope that then in a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, we're looking back and recognizing that it started somewhere. So thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you again for just looking towards the future, panel. And Dr. Moore with the Privilege Institute, I encourage you all to visit the websites and the many things that were reported. We will try to pull together some resources from this, because you all share some fabulous things, and make them available for dissemination. So thank you all. Thank you very much, Jackie. Thank you, Les. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Eddie. Sure appreciate you. Have a good day.
Thank
All
you.
right. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.